now I switch to English.
Okay. Iba a preguntar,
Okay, so
¿presentamos en inglés o en español? Como quieran. Yo lo he
I
presentado.
will introduce you in English.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, welcome everybody. I hope you all are doing well. Welcome to another JiLAEE seminar. And thank you again for being here. We are very happy today of having Rachid, Laajaj presenting today. Rachid is an associate professor of economics at Universidad de los Andes in Bogota. He received his PhD in applied economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he did a postdoc at the Paris School of Economics. His primary areas of research are technology adoption in agriculture, like the great S.B. Grilkes, and corruption and human capital. He studied these issues from a micro development perspective, both theoretical and empirical. He is clearly an empirical driven economist, and also what I found fascinating about Rachid, that he generates a lot of relevant and new empirical evidence, and he pays particular attention to the role of information. A lot of his work evaluates what policies can best contribute to poverty alleviation using up-to-date evaluation methods. In a paper that has just came out about subsidies and the African Green Revolution, he, with other co-authors, they show that subsidies need not be permanent to benefit farmers, something that is extremely relevant. Well-designed policies that encourages experimentation can generate widespread and lasting impacts, and mainly through spillovers and with a particular role for social interaction. In a most recent paper that is coming, I think, this year in another journal, together with Karen McCourt, is about measuring cognitive and non-cognitive skills in developing countries. Again, I think that now is almost everybody agree that non-cognitive skills are highly relevant, but a big question is, well, how do we measure it? Do we have good measures? And well, and in this paper, basically they attack this question, they tackle this question, and they highlight the risk of misinterpreting non-cognitive skills and personality using existing measures. They conduct survey experiment, Rachid and Karen, and they find that the standard application of commonly used scales of non-cognitive and technical skills suffers from large measurement error, resulting in low reliability and validity. But again, I think that this plays a big challenge for all of the people interested, again, in early childhood intervention and other public policies in order to enhance the development of non-cognitive abilities. And finally, I would like to highlight that Rachid is a good citizen of the profession. In 2017, he was awarded the Journal of Development Economics Outstanding Reviewer Award. So he's an outstanding referee too. He provides very good services to the profession. And finally, as an Argentinian, I also find very interesting that he teaches a course in corruption in developing countries. So again, thank you so much, Rachid, for being here. Rachid will present today equality of opportunity and human capital accumulation, motivational effect of a nationwide scholarship in Colombia. And to remember, the system, basically, You can interrupt Rachid at any time with question and again, the idea is to have a good exchange of ideas and well, thank you again, Rachid, and well, the floor is yours.
You're muted.
You're on mute.
Okay, now I'm not. Thanks a lot, Julio. Thanks. First, I forgot to turn on my camera, and now I was muted. Thanks for this quite exhaustive presentation. That's very nice. Thank you, everyone, for the nice conversations that we've had before this presentation, and looking forward to get as much feedback as possible. And this kind, as you say, it's about generating good discussions about it, so around it. So feel free to interrupt me, and happy to discuss all of this. If I understand well, we have an hour, of which maybe I try to take a little bit less than this, so that we have a bit of time at the end for discussion, if we manage, right? Okay, so I present this paper that's called the Equality of Opportunity and Human Capital Accumulation, Motivational Effect of a Nationwide Scholarship in Colombia. It's done jointly with Andres Moya and Fabio Sanchez, who are two colleagues also from the Universidad de los Andes. If it lets me change, okay. Let me first summarize very briefly what we do in this paper. It's about a program that is called Serpilo Paga, which means being smart pays off in Colombia. And it's a scholarship that benefited about 10,000 new students per year. And it's a very big one. It was the flagship program of the government when it came out. And it pays for 4 years at the university of their choice. So many would pick the top universities. Just to put in perspective, in the University of Los Andes, which I don't know if Julia will disagree, but it is one or the most prestigious one in the country, and hence also the most expensive. But we went from having nothing to 20% of our students that were coming from this program, because they would naturally pick some of the top universities. So this has made it generated lots of discussions in good and bad, with positive and negative aspects of it. It's lots of positive aspects. It's really mixing social classes, because places like Los Andes, like Rosario también, also the university, many top universities, they're expensive, they're private, many of the best universities, so not many people from different social classes can get there. So it will really shake this and create a lot of social mobility, and that is what we really liked about this. And we will have questions about how much. So there are other papers now that came out, one of them from a colleague, Fabio Sanchez, that show all the benefits that this generates for the beneficiaries of these scholarships. So obviously they get much more social mobility, and they get to better places, and they're more likely to go to university, etc. What we are interested in is what we call the motivational ex ante effect of the scholarship, because this is both a merit and need-based scholarship. You have to be under a certain income level to be eligible to receive it, but you also need to get one of the best grades in the country in order to be eligible for it. So that creates will really shake the social mobility, but that creates an incentive for students now that are low income to really start thinking, maybe now it's worth it for me to study harder, so that I can have a chance to move to a better future. In this society, we know that Colombia has a very low social mobility, so that's really a great opportunity. So this is this question, we frame it not only as what is this motivational effect, how much it is, but does an increase in equality of opportunity in the society that is brought by the scholarship translate into an increase in human capital accumulation, even before receiving, because my grades, better grades mean I can go to college now. Well, that motivates me further. So we have two main motivations for asking this question, and we will frame it basically. One is within the education debate, when we like to think of what is the most efficient way of investing in education, what kind of policies work best. Should we invest in textbooks, in more salaries for teachers, in more infrastructure? Or one of the possible investments is scholarships, and thinking of motivating the students to study harder through these scholarships or just to fund their study. And when we think of what are the benefits of scholarships, most of it thinks of the benefits on the beneficiaries. And here we'll document that there is also a large benefit even on those that are not beneficiaries yet or may never be, but they just get more motivated because the scholarship exists. And because that completely changes my opportunity, as I will show it very soon. This is a picture of the University of Los Andes, and it was just to document that this has made a lot of noise in the media as a big educative revolution in education, or a big change in terms of I think none of our universities really had seen so many people from different backgrounds, and that was very welcome from our universities. But the greatest concern, we'll talk about this, is from public universities, that they're saying, why are we indirectly giving more money to the private universities instead of just giving more money to the public universities so that they can get better? So just to highlight that it did have some controversy in terms of funding more the private university. So I think when this graph is, we actually take it from this other paper, the Londoño Rodriguez Sanchez 2017, that really documented what I would say the direct effect on that happens from giving it to the beneficiaries. In Colombia, it's very common to use this six levels of socioeconomic stratum. It's basically based on the neighborhood that you're in, and we know pretty much what kind of income level you are. So 6 is the highest income level, and 1 is the lowest. And if we just look at
Rachid?
what we will, yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I think that this type of policies is not about, again, it could be equality of opportunity, but again, basically targeted to the top ability people. In fact, I think that this is more an elite approach. This is not equality of opportunity. That's my impression, because, because you are targeting the top students. Of course,
that may be one of the criticisms.
But I don't see that this is, because again, equality of opportunity, it will be that you bring opportunities to, again, to all people, no? Not conditional on their ability, no?
But an opportunity is, it's not that it's not that it is giving money to everyone. It's giving everyone the opportunity to enter to university if they do well, right? So one thing that makes it equal is that it's well, you have to be low income, otherwise obviously the top income end up also being the ones that get the better grades, and then it ends up only helping those that are high income. So in what sense we mean a high opportunity? It doesn't mean it will help everyone, all of the students, but the initial situation from 2014 before the scholarship started is you can see that this is conditional on having a score that is in the top 10% of the students in the country. Still, being in the top 10% of the score in what we call Saber 11, which is the end of high school test in Colombia, you would still find that less than 20% of the lowest socioeconomic stratum enters, even about 20% for the lowest 2 socioeconomic stratum. It's so unfortunate that some of these really smart students never made it to college despite their great scores, and not that much, and it becomes much higher in the top. So there is this huge level of inequality initially, where we would say you could call it better opportunity. We also call it a more meritocratic society, in the sense that now this is still conditional on being in the top 10%. So remember that still, if you're poor, you're less likely to be in the top 10%. But once you make it to the top 10%, you're as likely as the high income students to actually make it to one of the accredited university, means a high quality university. And there's research that shows that if you go to a very bad one, but even if you show it just with access to university, it's really, really flattening the curve that was so unequal initially. So that's really what drove our attention initially, to say, what should such a personally, I've never seen such a drastic change from one year to the next one. And this is one of the best predictor of your social mobility. If you go to one of the top universities, you're quite likely to do well. You maybe not as well as the top stratum because they have more connections and all the things that will help them in life, but you're definitely much more likely to move on and not be in the stratum 1 or 2 in the next year. So how does this, go ahead, someone talked.
Sorry, Rachid, you were saying about precisely this connections point, that you have if you're in the top stratum. Is there any evidence that from this kind of studies in Colombia that once you admit more people from poor backgrounds, you make the average connection of students that were at the top of the distribution of income worse, so that they would get worse jobs? Because we were having this discussion about, we know that beneficiaries are benefiting, but like one of these benefits of elite schools is that you have rich people, rich men, and it has.
So I understand you're worried of penalizing these high.
I'm not worried. I'm interested in like this.
What is that? I don't know if there's, because it's, I mean, even in this drastic change in an elite school, that's 20% of the students, you still have 80% of the students that are from these kind of background, and plus these, I mean, sometimes it's even your family and your other contacts, right, that will help you more. I don't know of any evidence of this eventually. And there is other kind of research that has been done, for example, in terms of how their preferences change from these people for being exposed now to lower social income strata that have been doing well. They change also their prior about, oh, maybe those who don't do well, it's not necessarily because they're lazy, it's just because they are suffering from different conditions, and all these things of what are the reasons behind inequalities are changing. For this there has been some research that has been done and showed it. I don't know about this kind of loss in social connection, but I would assume if you lose 20%, you still have a good pool of people from whom you can get I don't know, help that day when you'll be looking for a job. So the big picture message is such a change in opportunities or meritocracy, depending on how one wants to call it, it could really change the motivation. If I was living in this 2014 world and I'm coming from one of this stratum, even before I get to this top 90%, I would think, is it really worth it for me to put all this effort if I know that even if I'm in a top student, my parents won't be able to afford university for me? Whereas now they can. So I think now they know, even if they can't afford it, there is a scholarship that would pay for it. So it becomes worth it to study now for me, I think. So we'll also interpret this as there is a dismotivating effect in this lack of social mobility, and hence the scholarship shows how much, if you didn't have such a rigid society in terms of social mobility, people could be more motivated. This is kind of the broader message that we hope may also come out of this research.
Excuse me, I have a couple of questions. Is the exam standardized? Is it the same for people in Bogota or people in the provinces in Colombia?
Yes, this Saber 11 test is standardized for the entire country.
Okay, and I have another question. Does the test depend only on cognitive skills, or does it also depend on prior knowledge? Because I believe students in Bogota might have had a much better education than the students that went to a provincial or a school in a rural area.
No, yeah, I mean, it's not a cognitive test. It's the kind of test that you end at the end of high school test that really tests all the knowledge that was supposedly acquired during all these your studying and high school education and 11th grade. So there is definitely a component of cognitive intelligence, but just a high component of just
so in that case,
acquiring all the materials that you need.
So in that case, the students from rural areas may be disadvantaged compared to students living in cities with better schooling.
Of course, totally. And that's the gap is huge. We'll get at this gap also, and we think of it as partly closing this initial gap. We'll document a little bit how this initial gap is. As part of the evidence of what you're saying, there is if we look at by the end of 2013, who was entering one of the Bogota accredited university, we naturally have a high concentration in what are some of the wealthiest areas, and of course of Bogota and other wealthiest areas. And if you compare in the next year, once the scholarship appears, then you have also this kind of diversity is not just in terms of income level, but we wanted to show it even geographically by department. You could see that there are broader people coming from different regions now a bit more than before, despite this inequality in access to initial quality of education. So the second motivation is really this one that I mentioned, this drastic change in equality of opportunity, how much this motivates students. And hence there is a message behind this, that when you think of there was a loss in human capital because you had some of these smart students that don't get to university, and the message would be there may be even two levels of loss. One is people are smart and they don't get to university. Second is even for these people to actually do well at this stage in Saber 11, in 11th grade, they do need to have been motivated from earlier on. And if they lose motivation from earlier on and they don't even study hard, not only because of all the harder conditions that we know they have from being in rural areas and lower quality schools, but on top of this, they're less motivated because they know that it's a very static society. For no matter what you do, you won't be, there is not much social mobility. And so really that's part of the message that we think also makes it interesting. So to be short on the literature, it fits into the socioeconomic achievement enrollment gap. When we think of sort of one of I think Panteleimon is your name. You mentioned one of the reasons why you have access to different school quality, your parenting is different quality, all the reasons that explain these gaps between why income also goes with very different achievement, with a difference in achievement, and that's what we usually call the achievement gap. And we'll think of a lot of the results as how much does this close the initial achievement gap that we have between poor and rich. And obviously it won't solve the entire problem because there are lots of other reasons, but that's at least one of the reasons. Then there is this ex post effect of scholarships and other intervention. There is a lot of studies on scholarships, but they tend to focus on ex post effects. There are only a few that are on ex ante effects that we tend to have here, but none of them will be as large scale as what we have in this study. And then there are some studies on this Serpilo Paga in Colombia in particular, but again, that's part of our contribution. So our contribution really goes into this. We are only perhaps the only one that studies the ex-ante effect, this motivational effect at the country level. And this is such a big magnitude also in the intervention, because you actually goes from not being able to go to university to go to the top university or one of the top universities for as long as for your full undergrad studies will be paid for it without worrying about it. So it's really a life-changing intervention, as opposed to many of the treatments that would be a small scholarship that helps you financially, but it doesn't necessarily changes the path of your mobility over time. So we think that that's what makes it interesting. And there was this strict sort of socioeconomic criteria that was applied and merit criteria. So the socioeconomic criteria will help us for our regression discontinuity approach, and the merit criteria is also what triggers this motivation to do better if you want to benefit from it. And so we think it speaks to this broader way in which inequality of opportunities actually hinders this human capital accumulation. Because it's a life-changing event, it also speaks to that debate, and that's not something that we had from other related studies on scholarships. And we use, I'll tell you about the empirical estimate, empirical strategy. I forgot to apologize. I know it's an experimental seminar. It's not really an experiment that we have here. It's a quasi-experiment, if you want, in the sense that we're using regression discontinuity approach, and more precisely difference in RD for a reason that I will tell you very soon. Okay, so we use this, we talk about this Serpilo Paga scholarship to give you a bit more information about this. This is 10,000 new students every year that would receive it. That's 2.7% of the whole pool of students. It funds the entire undergrad in the university of your choice, as we've said. One of the greatest debate around it is that it was too costly for the Ministry of Education, that when it started in 1 year, it cost 4.6% of the cost of the ministry budget for post-secondary education. But since you get a new cohort entering every year, after 4 years when it's full scale, it was almost 20% of this post-secondary education. for funding a limited number of students. That's what created the people were from the public sector in particular were saying, why with the public education, why aren't you putting this money into improving public education for everyone instead of allowing a few to benefit from the private high quality education? There's some of these universities could be public also, but many of them were also private, and some that were benefiting from the scholarship. So because you have to be accredited as a university for students to be able to use the scholarship to go there, meaning you have to be, it only works for going to a high quality university. Okay, and there is this double. So one is that it's need-based. We use, the program uses what is called a Sisbén, the Sisbén score, which is very commonly used in Colombia to determine who can receive social benefits, social programs. So anyone who is potentially recipient of any of the program would have its measure of its Sisbén score, basically asking lots of questions about the quality of your house and number of rooms that you have and the jobs and the levels of education of the parents. And there is some hidden formula that is used to calculate how poor and wealthy people are. And based on this, you will be eligible for different programs. And so just to think, the 55% poorest share of the population is eligible. So it's almost half of the population. It's merit-based eligibility, and that will be based on your score at SAR 11, but you don't know the exact score that you need. It's somewhat the top 9% of all high school seniors is what you would have to be in so that you can be elected. And that means in absolute terms, it was 310 in 2014, then 318, then 340. So this has been, in fact, the bar has gone up as it seems people were doing better from year to year. And hence they had to pull the bar up because the rule is there will be 10,000 beneficiaries. So they adapt the grade depending on how good people the students are doing. And then there is something that helps us a lot in the timing, is that it first happened in 2014. And in 2014, no one knew that it would happen. The students passed the test. And then after they passed the test, then the government decided, hey, we should have, there is all these smart students who don't have the means to go to university. Let's create this new program to allow them to go to top universities. So then in 2015, then that's our intervention when we think of the motivational effect really starts in 2015, because in 2014, no one had any idea that this would happen. But suddenly everyone talked about it throughout the year 2014, 2015. And when they pass their exam in 2015, they know, and there's 100% certainty that this will be applied. It's very credible. And last 10,000 students benefited from it. It made a lot of noise. So there is a sort of, it goes from no motivation at all to full motivation within 1 year. And that will help us our identification. In terms of, we said that they use this Sisbén criteria, but there's a second thing is that there are 3 groups that are typically used for the Sisbén. It could be rural, it could be urban, or it could be, well, what they separate the 14 largest cities within urban from other smaller cities. And just in terms of the distribution, we can see that the bulk of the distribution is still on the left of it. That's why we have about 55%. And that's eligible. And then what is our prior on what will be the distributional effect? Because we put a lot of focus on...
Just because I understand the setting quite well, why do you want the score, I mean, not you, but the government want the score to be conditional on the geographical area? Because cities have better housing on average?
I think the thinking behind it is that for being rural, you're already in a hard condition. So if you are, so the score is lower. If you are rural, but you have that certain level of income, it means that compared to other rural, you're not that bad. It's not, I mean, you could think of it as being comparable over places because it's one measure of income, but this is not my decision, but it's sort of to take into account that it's in relative terms. You're not that bad if you're around there, but you're rural compared to those that are there. That's the only explication I have. I'm not sure it's a good decision because you still are penalized for being rural in my sense. Yeah, our the distributional effect is something we're very interested in, and basically we have a theoretical model, in fact, just to think of what the distributional effect should be, and why in some other papers sometimes they find that everyone should be affected, but we will find effects that are very concentrated on the top of the distribution. And I mean, in our case, it's very, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that if you're below median and you only have 1 year to change this, you really have hope that you will be the best one in your program within a year, and you will be able to benefit from this scholarship. So the fact that it's very top of the distribution in terms of how much you need to be, you would have to be in the top 5% basically of your, among low-income people, you have to be top 5% if you want to be to be a recipient of the scholarship. So that's not easy at all, and if you're below median, well, you have to be realistic typically. So it depends on how good people are to assess. Obviously, no one tells you in which part of the distribution you actually are, but if you see that you're not doing that well compared to your peers, how much hope can you have to be a recipient on the next year? All this depending on, of course, what's already fixed and what really depends on you in this story. So let's start with just a descriptive look of the data. How large is this achievement gap? Because we'll always think of this as how much it closes the achievement gap, and how much this in a Dif-in-Disc approach, very descriptive, do we see a change between 2015 and 2014, right? And how does this change? So just looking at very basic data, this group is the eligible. Okay, and the group on the groups on top, we divided them into the non-eligible. Eligible means poorest, right? Poorest half of the population, poorest 55% of the population, and the non-eligible would be divided again into 4 groups depending on their level of income, just to show that there is a very gradient, a very clear gradient that is happening here. But you can see that this basically the difference. How do we read this? The median of the poor people is basically the 44th percentile of the entire population in terms of score, whereas the median of the wealthy people is around the 60th percentile of the population. So that tells you this a bit more than 15 points of difference is the gradient in terms of what we use is we convert it into how you rank from 0 to 100. How do you rank in your cohort, so that we make it more comparable. Okay, so there is this big gap that happens initially, and if we look at the median, it doesn't close that much, at least according to this descriptive data when we reach 2015. If you look at the 75th percentile, there will be, think of this distance being the initial gap, and there is a little bit of it going up. Of course, then we'll look at whether this is significant and then have better identified approach. And when you look at the 90th percentile, they do seem to be a clearer upper trend happening in 2015, and we'll see how much this is actually closing the gap compared to the initial gap. Of course, one should not expect that this will completely close the gap. And the more we go to the extreme, the 95th percentile, we could really see even more closing of the gap that is happening. Okay. Showing this in a more descriptive way, in the year 2014, we do see some of the results that are, so as I was saying, this is we think of among the eligible, the need-based eligible group, and then the non-eligible group. Okay, we compare these two, and we have a gap in the average score, but we can also think of what is the average at each percentile. So one way, if we will focus most on the 90th percentile, in the 90th percentile, basically the 90th percentile of the eligible people is in reality at the 83rd percentile of all Colombia versus 94th percentile for the non-eligible people. So you have about 10 points difference between the two groups. 10 points of ranking, if you want, right? 10 percentage points of difference. And hence, when we find an effect, we will find then you could look at how much, this is closing from 10 to about 8.8. So this is this represents basically an 11% closing of the initial gap. Going from 9.9 gap to an 8.8 gap between the two groups is 11% closing. So that's, we will interpret most of our results in terms of, at this percentile, what was the initial gap, and then what is the change that happened between 2014 and 2015, and hence what is, by how much the gap has closed. So then you can discuss how much an 11% closing of the gap, how big it is for you. Is it big enough? But as someone mentioned, there are lots of other constraints, of course, between poor and rich, and one should not expect that only the motivational effect will close everything. But given that they were given nothing else than just motivation, than just the hope that if you do well, you could go to university, it seems pretty substantial that you can get this order of magnitude at the whole country level. Okay, now let's talk now about our empirical. Of course, this was just descriptive, about our empirical estimation now. So one natural estimation here would be to have a regression discontinuity approach, benefiting from the fact that being eligible depends on your Sisbén score. Once we normalize it by rural area or urban area, all this, you have a certain score. If you're above it, you're eligible. If you're below it, you're not eligible. That naturally lends itself into a regression discontinuity kind of approach. Yes.
Yes, sorry to interrupt. So one thing is this exam was required by all universities before this scholarship. So this is like the SAT of Colombia, or this is something that the government created, and somehow if you are eligible for the scholarship, this means that you already have basically the acceptance of the university, or not necessarily. So you may have people who qualify and are not accepted to Los Andes, for example.
Okay. Yes. So this is an exam that all the students must pass at the end of the 11th grade. This is used by many universities as either the criteria or one of the criteria for entrance for admission at the university. But each university has the choice to either to set the bar where they want. Some could even recalculate. We put more weight on math because that's what matters to us. Even in our university, each department sets its own cutoff in terms of what's the criteria for admission. So good thing is there is no selection in terms of who passes it or not, but it's true. You could be a recipient of the scholarship, and then, well, you have to be accepted to a university to actually get the money. It means we give it to you based conditionally on you getting accepted to university, and that's where there are some cases. But usually, if you're that good, then at least some university will accept you. It's true that the very top ones could have a criteria. The University of Los Andes criteria, for example, tends to be higher than just being eligible for the scholarship. So it means but you would definitely make it to some of the quite good universities as well. Okay, so there is this, yeah. Oh, sorry, I thought there was a comment.
I think there was someone asking a question. No, well, I had another question. Are there any incentives for the teachers for their class to do better? For example, monetary incentives that teachers will get a bonus if their class does better than another?
Nothing that goes, so usually no. And definitely nothing that would goes really at the same time as this intervention and using the same cutoff or things like this. So no, the only incentive is that the schools were very proud of getting students that were getting these scholarships for. If you think of a poor environment, rural area, they say, oh, we had one of our students made it to the Serpilo Paga program. This was the non-monetary incentive that came with it.
All right, thank you.
So the RD would have been a natural approach. And in fact, the first version of the paper, we were using this, and the results were, at the end, it's not tremendously different. But so the referees told us, well, there is a big problem is that you have many, we do document lots of programs, and that goes from primary childhood, some that support buying your own house, and some that support elderly people. But there are different programs, and they have They didn't have to, but the government tends to use the same cutoff sometimes for different programs. So there is this limitation in the RD strategy, is that one of the criteria is that the only thing that differentiates those that are just above and just below the eligibility criteria is only this program. And nothing else is different, not in their characteristics, not in benefiting from any other kind of treatments. And so that's a problem. Then we have one big advantage, which is that Serpilo Paga started in this it was given in 2014, but the motivation effect starts in 2015. And hence our strategy will be more a difference in RD, which means, so that's the regression, is just like an RD regression, but it's basically the same as doing the RD for 2015 and doing the RD for before 2015. And then you take the difference between the RD coefficient that you get between the two, with the idea that maybe there are other programs, but the other programs were there before and they're still happening in 2015. So it's the hypothesis is that the effect of other programs is constant over time. And if you see that the RD in 2015 gives you a different result than the RD in 2014, then you can attribute this to really the impact of the program. And that's the broad strategy that we're using. I realize that I'm already kind of slow and perhaps lagging behind, but we're getting to the results now. This is probably the shortest summary of the results that we have. When you think of this is our difference in discontinuity coefficient. This is eligible times post. Here it is, the eligible times 2015 or times post treatment, which is our beta 1, is the effect. So this is the coefficient that we get in the first line. And in the bottom, we convert this impact in terms of what is the gap reduction. If you look at, as we were saying before, if you look at the initial gap at the 90th percentile, by how much this motivational effect actually closes the gap. And OLS regression doesn't show any effect. At 25th percentile, nothing. 50 at the median, maybe it looks positive, but it's not significant. And we start seeing significant effect by the 75th percentile and the 90th percentile, where it's substantially more significant. And when you think of it in terms of order of magnitude compared to the initial gap, it seems like it's closing by 16%, the initial gap. So that's tremendous. First, it's happening in all the country. It's only happening in the top of the distribution, but that's the nature of the program. It motivates the top students to actually work harder, and that was sort of the theoretical expectation as well. But from the 75th% onward, it seems like it is having a substantial effect, and it's without giving them anything but a change in opportunity. You actually have a 16% closing from the initial gap between rich and poor. Now they still have problems of sometimes access to electricity, absenteeisms of teachers, lack of, too many students per class. You have all these inequalities that are happening. But the idea, the mechanism is that the input, one of the most important input is how hard the student will work, the motivation of the students, and that can actually increase if they think that it may pay off for them through access to university. So instead of just giving you a few percentiles, go ahead.
So I'm still confused about it. What's the comparison group here? I mean, so the threshold is if you're below, I mean, not the Sisbén threshold. So you're in group, what was it again? There's
the thing. So here, for example, within each group, if you think of the rural, the comparison is if you're on that side, you're not eligible. And if you're on this side, you're eligible.
But everybody on that side, I mean, you're so that it's
so you first normalize the Sisbén group, right? So that you basically take the difference from your cutoff. So if you're on the urban side, this graph may be confusing, but at the end you have to separate each group, the rural, urban, and 14 cities, and you normalize it to the cutoff that is applied to this place. So it's basically, if you're on the rural side, it is the value, your value of the Sisbén score is how far you are from this 40 something. If you're in the urban side, let's say it's the same line, it's your Sisbén score is 0 if you're right on the line, and it's positive if you're there, and it's negative if you're there. So in each case, it's the person that is just marginally eligible for your geographical area compared to the one that is just marginally not eligible.
Okay, and they know their eligibility, right?
Yes, they know that. That's one of the important criteria, but when you sign up, even you have to sign up a year before for this thing, and they ask you to enter your score, and people are very aware of the value of their Sisbén because so many programs
The
depend
other
for
programs.
it.
Okay.
It's something
Okay.
that people know quite well. But definitely one of the conditions is if people don't know it, you can think of it as an intention to treat where not everyone is actually affected, because if you don't know it, it won't affect your motivation. And it's possible that there is a small fraction that doesn't know it, but the majority really seems to.
Okay. But it is limited just to this threshold, like to within plus or minus of this threshold.
Yeah, and so there's this difference between eligible and non-eligible, but then it's also the identification comes from this difference over time, how this difference changes over time between 2015 and before, right? So that's one of the main results. If we look at it throughout the range of the percentiles, sorry, that jumps, my computer freezes a little bit. Okay. There is basically around the 75th percentile, that's where we had significant effect. So it looks like by the 75th percentile, most of it seems to be significant and around 10% to 15% in terms of how much this scale should be read as what is the share of the gap that is being closed. Before this, it seems to jump around a lot, but it seems not significant at all. So we don't pay too much attention to these to what's not significant, and what becomes consistent is the positive effect. Somewhat maybe at the median, but it's not super significant by then, and it starts being a little bit higher and more significant on the top percentiles. So the usual kind of graph that you will want to see in an RD kind of strategy. So this is to simplify, this is first, it's the usual kind of graph, but there are a number of differences. One is that we don't plot the mean, but the 19th percentile at each bin. And then it is the change of the 90th percentile between 2014 and 2015 that we will plot here at each bin. And then we see that there is in fact this jump that seems to be happening between the before and after. That seems to be quite substantial. And that's the magnitude of the jump is about what we see as a coefficient. So that's then the other kind of robustness checks that you will want to see with a regression discontinuity is how does it depend on bandwidth, on the choice of the bandwidth. We use the CERD bandwidth, which is one of the recommended one that is calculated automatically. But whatever our bandwidth are all in the range of that you would find it with usual programs would be between 3 and 8. But we take a broader range, and no matter what bandwidth you take, you're pretty much getting a robust result. So we're not too worried that this is subject to the choice of bandwidth that you use. Then some of the conditions for unconfoundedness include that there is no manipulation of people, and that means not getting one of the things that could reveal manipulation would be if you would see. So this is a better view of the distribution of the score and the normalized score that we have. You're at 0 if you're just eligible, and you're below 0 if you're eligible and above 0 after we subtracted your Sisbén to the cutoff that applies in your geographical area. And basically there is no bunching at all that seems to be happening. It would happen on that side if there was a strategic bunching with people manipulating the score. So the test also doesn't give us any bunching happening. The other thing that you want to see is that there is no systematic difference in various characteristics between people just above and below the cutoff. And so you could see whether it's being your geographical area, whether it's urban or not, whether you're at the level of education of your father, your mother, age, sex, none of these seems to jump. And there is kind of your high school rank. Only one of the variable is significant out of, I think. And so we run it in terms of just the RD and the Diff-in-RD between 2014 and 2015. And no matter which one we use, none of this really comes out significant. So we are not worried about any evidence of manipulation that could be happening here between these groups. And so now in the Diff-in-RD, your identification, as we said, comes from the difference between the RD that you have in 2014 and the one that you have in 2015. So we want, if we show the RD coefficient that you get year by year, this is how it looks like. You basically, it doesn't, here it's for the 25th percentile. It doesn't have much happening. By the median, it is improving. This is basically the RD coefficient that you have in 2014 and the one that you have in 2015. And both when you look at it in the 75th percentile, now this change starts being larger, and that's, as we saw in the previous table, it is significant. And in the 90th percentile, here is the change also from 2014 to 2015. Yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So one thing is, can you look also at how the university reacts to this program? So for example, does the university reduce the scholarship that they used to give, or they complement and they, so can you evaluate the effect on the university, on the behavior of the universities?
There is, in fact, the other paper that we cite at the beginning from Fabio Sanchez and Julián Londoño and Catarina Rodriguez is really looking at all this story. And so the good thing is we didn't do a lot of this, but we have the other paper that tells us the story. I haven't heard of effect on scholarships. Are they reducing their scholarships? What's clear is that they are increasing a bit the number of students that they receive. So in front of this, one way of thinking about it is the supply is a bit rigid. You can't increase it completely from one year to the other, but the demand has increased a fair amount for the top universities. So they do a bit of both. To some extent, they increased a bit how many students they're receiving, but they also raised the bar for acceptance. Almost all universities raised the bar, and that has some negative effect for the wealthier students that wanted to pay for the tuition. Some of them, they wanted to pay, but now they're just not accepted because now the bar has been higher because of this program. I actually think also some people don't like this program because it made it higher for some to get to the top universities, at least during a few years.
Can I ask a question on that? Because I also was wondering about school reactions, but in particular with raising the bar. And it's not smoking gun evidence, but it's some evidence there might be some grade inflation at the high school level going on. Like it might be that if teachers expect that certain kids are close to getting admitted through this scholarship, they might just push their grades upward.
But remember, this is a standardized test that is just it's the same test applied to everyone, right? So you can't
help their students.
You can't manipulate this. You can only train students more, but you cannot manipulate this. And the training of students will be one of the worries. So let me not repeat too much. And I think that one of the worries related to what you're saying, Egan, is you can manipulate the score, you can inflate grades, but what you could do is eventually train students more just for the Saber 11 test. That's probably one of the greatest concern here is, what if this increase is not an overall increase in knowledge? It's just that people are adjusting their effort, working more on preparing, working for the test rather than a general knowledge accumulation. The best answer that we have to this is, one is that it's a very broad knowledge test. So usually the thinking is, if you do better at this, it means you probably know more in overall. It's hard to, I don't know, in France it's called the baccalaureate. It's a very broad test. It's really hard to prepare for just this kind of test. You just have to know more if you want to do better. So this is the more specific a test is, the more easier it is to just work for the test. The other argument that we have is, so 11th grade is the one for which it actually matters. But if you're in 9th grade, your score doesn't matter at all. In fact, it's not even, the data is not at the individual level, but at the college level. In each college school, in each primary school, in each or secondary school, you have the score, the average score of the school. That's how the data is. It's kind of anonymized by students, but you know the score of each school. And hence, what we wanted to look at is there some evidence that even at Saber 9, which is the end of 9th grade test, students are actually doing better if they are eligible. And that would mean, and now I know that in 2 years I'll be passing that test, and I know that this change of opportunity also should apply to me. So I'm already motivated to work harder 3 years before, so that I get more chances now of passing this. There we cannot do a regression discontinuity. The only thing that we could do is to interact the share of eligible in your school with being post 2015, right? And basically, this 6.1, in fact, this in that score, which corresponds to an 11% reduction in the gap. So basically, this should be interpreted as If your school has 100% eligible students, then the gap compared to a school that has a 0% eligible students will actually go down by 11%. So there is also, and that's one reason why we're interested in this is just there's additional evidence that students are working harder from early on. But the other reason for being interested in this is, were they just working the test? And there, because it's a zero stake test for them, the fact that it's moving up, even though it has zero stake, is giving us more comfort that, okay, maybe they're not just working the test, the same effect is happening or something similar happening for even earlier on, despite the fact that there is no test. We do run some placebo tests for other years and we don't find any significant effect going on. All of this is also sort of wanted to get a broader picture of human capital accumulation and not just saying, okay, it's this test that is improving. So another way of thinking of human capital accumulation is just how much did this help them get into this? How much this improve in test scores help them get into top universities? Part of the anecdote that we have in mind is we've heard that some students worked very hard, but they didn't make it to the cutoff to get the scholarship. But some of them said, well, now that I work hard, now that I got a good grade, I should maybe still try to go to university. And maybe I go to a public university. That's not bad, but I'm not going to this private expensive university. But that's fine. There is still a human capital accumulation effect, even for those that they worked harder because they were motivated, but they don't get the scholarship. How do we get at this? So in this graph, we have enrollment into a need, I think, enrollment to universities, and you can think just to higher education, or you can think of it as into an accredited university, high quality universities. In all cases, I will restrict the sample. We will restrict the sample to the 5% above. Think of this as the top 5% of the distribution who became recipients of the scholarship. So there is an obvious jump that happens from 2013 to 2014. And these are the recipients of the scholarship. But there is a second jump that seems to be happening from 2014 to 2015, whether we look just at accredited or all universities. And this additional jump could be that now they were more prepared, so they got better scores. And now even it's not only the effect of the scholarship, but it's also the motivation effect. Now, if you say, okay, but this is hard to interpret because these ones received the scholarship. So now we look at those that didn't receive the scholarship, but we know that if you were between the 90th and the 95th percentile, you increased your grade substantially. And hence we see in this group that they are actually jumping there is a jump that happens from 2014 to 2015 in entry to universities and also in entry to accredited universities, maybe some public universities, maybe. So this jump in 2015, at least this is very descriptive. We try to get more evidence on the human capital accumulation, but part of the story seems to be saying, if you worked hard, this is not negligible. A 8 percentage point additional entry to university is not negligible, given that they didn't receive anything, but they just worked harder, and now they're entering more some of these universities. So that seems to be part of the story that's happening there. That's it. I think because time is running off. I wanted to mention just now that the program is ended, because with the change of government, it was. There is a new program that is called Generation E, but it's really downscaling it in terms of number of beneficiaries and in terms of how much it is paying. It's a big downscale compared to what it was. But so we did our report for the Ministry of Education. We also shared it with them. And the president, in his speech, he actually mentioned when he was defending the program affected the quality of education through other reasons and the motivation of the youth to put more effort so that they can access better university. A question that was reflected in the recent results in the Saber exams. So we're happy sometimes as a researcher, you don't even know whether your research has any impact. And we see that the president is citing your work to justify, to try to defend the policy. We thought that was a good outcome. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to save the program, but maybe it helped it not disappear completely. So just we thought that was cool. Since it's the end of it, I'll leave this page and answer any last question if we have time.
Thank you so much, Rachid, for great presentation, and well, we learned a lot, and And well, I don't know if there are other questions.
A quick question on that graph that you showed, this sort of typical RG graph, as you said. If maybe I wasn't understanding properly, but I mean, does it look like the difference comes from people just above the threshold that are doing worse?
Because you see more of a drop going on here. Maybe we should extend it a little bit more so that you actually see whether it keeps going up. In that, I think usually the bigger trend is that it goes up. There's an upward trend that is happening here. Yeah, we have to look closer at the data. We did it also year by year. Now we just put it also the difference between year and the year by year. It's maybe not clearly driven by some of this group. I mean, this is still a large group of people. It's not 3 people, but it could be.
Well, I mean, you could imagine that people just above the threshold. I mean, I don't know. Now you have more people competing. It's harder to get in. They weren't selected to be part of this group. I mean, you could see some sort of demotivating effect there, but I wasn't sure if that's where the
now,
whole.
What comforts us. I remember we had a bit of this discussion, but so the Dif-in-Disc also shows similar effects. So here, maybe if you zoom a lot, it seems like it's partly driven by this. Not as much if you only look at the RD in the year 2015, and the Dif-in-Disc also showed that even if you had the whole chunk of the population moved, right, and if you compare left to right. So maybe it's not such a local effect. I mean, the RD is good for the identification, right? And if you think, usually the trend usually is more upward, but you also have, because you have also some controls, maybe the trend is not as clear. I don't think it's driven. Well, the graph sometimes looks like this, but I don't think it's driven just by a drop in that group. In fact, these. Yeah, especially because the Dif-in-Disc also helps showing that you have bigger picture effect, not such a super localized effect.
Right. Okay. I wasn't sure if I interpreted it incorrectly, so.
But it potentially raises that doubt. I'm not sure how one would do more to rule it out.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rachid, again, and well. Thank you everybody for participate at the seminar today. And well, we are having next Friday, we will have Catalina Franco Huitrago from the Norwegian School of Economics. She will present strategic decisions have major consequences, gender differences in college major decisions. So I hope that you all can join, and Rachid, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you for seeing me.
Thanks, Rachid.